So welcome everyone to Breaking Free of the Processed Food Force Field. And I'm Mary Colette Rogers. And like I said, I think most of you know me already. Just a little bit of my background though. I've been in the healthy eating area for well over 30 years now. It started when my kids were young and we faced a health crisis, and by golly, wouldn't you know it, a good diet got us out of it, and also getting rid of gluten and dairy. One of the things that I do is I've got a nonprofit called The New Kitchen, because what I'm interested in doing is inspiring a new view of the kitchen as our friend and our ally on the path to healthy eating. So talking about processed foods is a really dear to my heart topic, because I think I think processed foods are really one of the root causes of why we have so much trouble around healthy eating. So let me give you an overview of where we're going today. Because processed foods are getting a lot more attention in the news these days. Even the government is thinking about recommending that we limit our consumption of these foods. So what we're going to be doing is talking about what is a processed food, because there's actually 4 levels, and only one of those do we need to be worried about. And then we want to talk about, well, why are the experts warning us to avoid these foods? And then what can we do? Hot, and you brought that up before the class started, is, well, what can we do about this? And in Cindy, I know you talked about it's hard, because it does take time to eat a diet that doesn't have the processed foods in it. And then we'll actually be doing a little bit of cooking. And that'll be kind of a fun break. And then we're going to talk about something that's called the enablement issue, because we're going to get into how much does our thinking have to do with our ability to break free of processed foods. Okay, so with that, well, let's go ahead and get started. And first, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, because I want to talk about, I just mentioned that there's 4 different kinds of processed foods. And the first of those is, let me see if I can get rid of that. Yeah. The first of those is your level 1, is your minimally, almost no processing of these foods. These are things like, say, an apple. All you might have to do is wash it, and that's all you might have to do. Meat, you might have to cook. So cooking, you have to understand that processing is a pretty broad term, that it can cover everything from just cooking your food to canning it, like we used to do with tomatoes, to all the way up to what they call extrusion in big steel vats. So that's why the experts have categorized different foods into different levels. So this level 1 is your minimally processed foods, a little cooking, a little washing, a little chopping, not a big deal, not worried about those. Level 2 is your processed culinary ingredients. This is your olive oil. So there's the olive, but then we squeeze the olive oil out. Again, pretty minimal processing, and we're not too worried about that. Then level 3 is a little more processing. Cheese, they have to combine it with some rennet and things like that, and cultures to be able to get it to go into to make cheese out of milk. And they can your beans for you, can your tuna fish, but again, pretty minor. But then we get up to this level 4 of ultra processed foods, because the level of processing at this level, just went way and above the traditional forms of processing that we've seen over the centuries. And these are, your foods like frozen pizzas and fast foods and things like that. And they are what they say are processed to essentially a whole new level. So they are really what we call industrial formulations. They're not even real whole foods anymore. And you can see they're made up entirely of substances extracted from other foods or synthesized in laboratories. And they're made through industrial techniques like extrusion and molding and pre-processing by frying. They contain all sorts of additives that make them hyper-palatable. Basically, they're designed to achieve a certain bliss point that makes us crave them and essentially overeat them. So those are our 4 main levels. And obviously, it's only that last level, the level 4, that's a real problem that we need to watch out for. And so you might be wondering, well, how do I know if it's one of those level 4 foods? And that's pretty easy. You all know this. read the ingredient listing. I have this stuff called muscle milk, and I don't know in what universe they can call this anything close to milk, but I don't know if you can see this, but there's the ingredient listing, all of this stuff here. So you can pretty quickly identify an ultra-processed food by looking at that ingredient listing. And if it's a mile long, you've probably got problems. If it's filled with things with 2 or 3 or more than 2 syllables, you've probably got problems. If it's filled with things that isn't in your pantry and you can't find it at a grocery store, probably something to avoid. That would be one of your ultra-processed foods, or UPFs they're called. And so it's pretty obvious when you look at ingredient listings. Here's your Lipton onion mushroom soup, and I look over at its tiny little ingredient listing there. It's pretty easy to see if you've got, the obvious offenders in there, the artificial colors and the trans fats or hydrogenated fats and things like that, where trans fats are no longer used anymore. So that's pretty easy. But there's a couple of instances that aren't so easy to identify. One of those is corn chips. And, we ate corn chips for the longest time. And, you looked at the ingredient listing, it's usually corn, salt, and oil. And so you think, well, that's not so bad. But then what's kind of interesting is that there's a reporter for the Washington Post, and he has done a lot of research into these processed foods. Whoops, wrong screen share. Sorry there. Let me get back to let's see if I can find there. There we go. He's done a lot of research into these processed foods. And he had a podcast, and you're going to get handouts that have all of this information in it. So don't worry. And you'll find the reference to his podcast. So if you want to listen to it yourself, but it was really great that he explained this, what we mean when something's really highly processed, because I didn't really realize what that meant. But like, for instance, for these Doritos, you see on the picture of the corn on the left there, okay, good, natural, real whole food corn. How does that get into Doritos? And he explained it. And I'm going to read this to you, and I know it's a little long, but I just think it gives you such a good sense of what we're talking about when we're talking about these processed foods. So first they take this nice real whole food corn and they grind and mill it with high-speed milling machines that separate the fibrous part of the corn from the starchy endosperm. And that leaves a lot of carbs separated from the fiber. And because the fiber, of course, is where the really nutritious part of the corn is. But that's really good for the manufacturers to get rid of that, because then the remaining part of the corn is very shelf stable and products will last a long time. Then they take that corn and they soak it in water, pulverize it into dough, and then feed it into an extrusion cooking machine. Probably haven't heard of that, but it's a big steel barrel that subjects the pulverized corn to really high temperatures, really high pressures, and essentially melts the corn dough. That sounds yummy, doesn't it? Then they take that, mold it into sheets, cut it into chip shapes, and they bake it. And then for good measure, they fry it in vegetable oil, which raises a question of, well, what kind of oil did they use? How often do they change it? Then they spray on cheese and cheese flavorings and salt and MSG and flavor enhancers and sugar and artificial colors and on and on and on. And then they bag and ship. And there's now evidence coming out that the packaging materials, often made of plastics, contain phthalates, which also leach into the food. So there's a little more processing going on there. So this is how things like this happen, that all of a sudden you've got something with just corn and salt and oil, but it's a lot, it's completely transformed from what that corn was originally. And then another surprising thing, and this one's a little tougher because I call it the story of the whites. And, the whites are the white flour, the white bread, the white pasta, the white rice, the white sugar. And when you look at all of these, they're so common, they're so familiar, you wouldn't think that they're processed foods. But just take a look at, for instance, this diagram of how a whole grain becomes what I call a half grain. You've got this nutritious outer shell, which is the bran of a grain. This is the picture of the whole grain. And it's got the bran on the outside, which is high in fiber and B vitamins. And then there's the germ, and that is also very high in nutrients. And then you've got the starchy inside, and it's got some nutrients in it, but not nearly as much as when you have the entire grain. And so as things go, compared to the corn story, this isn't quite as much processing, but it's still, what you're doing is you're getting rid of all these nutrients. So you're getting calories without the nutrients that should be attached to them. And one of the things that Karen, we're going to have a guest speaker, Karen Kennedy, in just a few minutes. And one of the things she's going to talk about is, why is that important? Why is it important that when we're eating, when we eat these white food products, what does that do to our blood sugar, and why do we care about that? So we'll get to that in just a minute. So now we get to this problem of, oh, and actually I will stop this share again, is, okay, so we have these processed foods, we've got these 4 levels, and we've got these ultra processed foods. We can identify them with the ingredient listing. So be sure to always read ingredient listings for every packaged food. But so what's the big deal about them? Why are they such a problem? Because if you listen to the industry is just, thinks they're great. Of course they do, because they're very affordable. They're a great way to get nutritious food for people. Their definition of nutritious is simply that it keeps you alive. It doesn't necessarily help your health, and it doesn't help you thrive. But it keeps you alive. You're not going to die of starvation. They're safe. In the past, a lot of foods were made that were not very safe. They didn't have very hygienic processes in their factories. But now they've got that down. So, you're not going to get food contamination, at least most of the time. And above all, they're so convenient. You don't have to do a thing. They're all ready to go for you. So yeah, the industry gushes over these. And one, is saying, well, why would you not want to eat these? Well, and it's just because there's this little thing called our health. And there's been more and more evidence coming out that, these foods are really a problem when it comes to our health. And the first level of studies that have been coming out, and they've actually been coming out for quite a few years, we just haven't heard about them a lot. But there's been study after study that have shown that, let me see, I think I have a screenshot on this. Let me get back to it. Let's see. Why is that not working? Oh, there we go. Okay. Yeah. No, that's the Hall study. So I must have missed that one. Okay. Yeah, we'll wait on that then. What has come out so far is a lot of observational studies. And my understanding is that in these, they've studied, like, what do people who are afflicted with certain conditions and diseases, looking at their diet and seeing if there's correlations between what they're eating and these kind of, things like cancer, heart disease, things like that. And in fact, there have been quite a lot of connections between a whole range of diseases, heart disease, diabetes, obesity, on and on and on. In fact, one of the most recent studies, I think they call it a meta study because it's really, really big. They associated it with 32 different conditions and diseases. So that is kind of troubling, isn't it? But still, they're observational studies. They don't prove causation. They're just these correlations. But what's interesting is just a couple years ago, and this is where I'm going to screen share here. Just a couple years ago, there was a fellow named Kevin Hall, who works for the National Institutes of Health. And he decided he wanted to do a controlled study. So he recruited 20 healthy adult volunteers who stayed at an NIH facility for a 4-week period. And during that time, he broke the group up into two groups of 10, put one group on a diet of ultra-processed foods and the other on a diet of real whole foods. And what's interesting is that he said in the study results that I read, he said, I had sort of expected that there wouldn't be any difference. And I'm kind of like, that's my snarky comment. The really there, honestly? because actually participants on the ultra-processed diet ate about 500 calories per day more than when they were on the unprocessed diet. And they gained both weight and body fat. In fact, they put on about 2 pounds on average. Meanwhile, participants on the unprocessed diet ended up eating less and lost weight. So there we have it, that, yeah, these processed foods do cause some problems for our health. And there's some pretty good correlated or causation evidence right there. So at this point, then, now what scientists are trying to explore is, why are these processed foods, how could they make such a difference in our lives? And I don't know, I kind of have a duh reaction to it, honestly, because it's like, well, these processed foods are not food. they're not foods, is what I call them. And so our bodies were designed to process foods. And so if we feed them not foods, it would be, similar to the common metaphor of putting Coca-Cola in your car. Of course, it's not going to run. But of course, we've got scientists that are looking at a lot of different things about why these processed foods do cause so much trouble for us. And sometimes they would think it has to do with satiety, that it messes up with our feeling of fullness, so we overeat them. And that's compounded by the fact that they're designed and manufactured so that we can't eat just one. They're made so that we can eat lots of them, and then, of course, buy lots of them. And so, whoops, here's my cat. I knew that he would be coming. So if you see a cat cross the screen, it's him. Another thing that people are worried about is that it's all the additives and the colorings and things like that that are in them. Like I mentioned, the stuff in the packaging that could be a problem. And also just, oh, here he comes. So you're going to see his tail. Hopefully he'll go away real soon. Okay, you go down now. Go on. There we go. So yeah, we if I can remember, where was I now before he jumped up on me? So there's a lot of different things that are going on, and they're trying to figure out which ones are the problem. But my view is, do we really want to wait until we get definitive, absolutely undeniable evidence that these are a problem? Or maybe it would be a good idea to just go ahead and start thinking about how we can start avoiding them and moving on to other foods in our diet. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. And, I've gone through this science, and this is where, Karen, I don't know if you can hear us and you're tuned in, but this is where I'd love to have Karen chime in just a little bit, because I'm talking about this sort of high level scientific data that, yeah, it's connected to all these different diseases, and it's got these problems with obesity and this kind of thing. But Karen is a functional nutritionist who works with blood sugar, is, and I'm going to ask her to unmute. There we go. And she works with this. So I thought it would be good to have her chime in a little bit and tell us, Karen, be a little more granular for us and specific about why is, especially the white foods. Karen and I did an article on crackers and these different white foods, and it'd be nice to know, Karen, why do we care so much about blood sugar? What's the big deal here?
Yeah, so why we care so much about blood sugar? There's just no end to answers to this. I could start with statistics of diabetes or what it does to us, on a day-to-day basis. But, when it comes to the highly processed foods, it's not always cut and dry how it affects blood sugar. But overwhelmingly, I see people who, when they're eating a lot of highly processed foods, like you're talking about, they're eating a lot of foods that enter the bloodstream rapidly and cause blood sugar to go up rapidly, and then come crashing down rapidly. And that's one thing. And why that's important is that, our bodies, they like to maintain a steady state. They like homeostasis. And we want our blood sugar to stay in a fairly tight range most of the time. And when it goes too high or too low, those are major stressors. And so when you have a lot of processed foods in the diet, what happens is you get your blood sugar going very high and then low, and then high and then low, kind of in a yo-yo cycle all day. And this is what I'll see a lot when I'm monitoring people on continuous glucose monitors. And what happens from that really depends on the person, depends on their activity level, depends on their biology. But overwhelmingly, what ends up happening is people become undernourished, like not getting enough nutrients, not getting enough protein, but they start storing extra fat because it's causing their insulin levels to go high. And I threw the word insulin in there because when we're talking about blood sugar and glucose, that's the energy that we get from food. And we know about our blood glucose or blood sugar, which is the same thing. But then we have this hormone insulin that's in our bodies to help us control blood sugar. And when that's having to overreact to bring blood sugar under control, that's when we start getting diseases like cardiovascular disease and prediabetes and diabetes. Because what insulin does when it's chronically high and chronically stimulated is a few things. That chronically high insulin tells our body, store fat. And don't just store lots of fat, but store it in the viscera around our organs, around our liver. And so we end up with things like fatty liver or fatty pancreas. And what insulin also does is it tells us it raises our blood pressure, it raises our triglycerides, and it leads to something called metabolic syndrome, where you'll see things like high blood pressure, high triglycerides, and increased waist. You'll have that extra belly fat that's not budging, and even people who have very slender like legs will end up with this kind of a body shape, and it's indicative of poor metabolic health. And you'll also see, erectile dysfunction and PCOS here. But really what's going on under the surface is cardiovascular disease. And while we might talk a lot about cancer and other things being problematic with our health, still the number one cause of early death, preventable early death in men and women is cardiovascular disease and stroke. And even before you get that first heart attack, you're reducing energy, increasing risk of cancer, increasing risk of dementia. And all of this is connected to that erratic blood sugar control that we see from eating highly processed foods.
Wow, Karen, that's wonderful. I mean, and I love how you brought it down to more specifics, and and I think bottom line, this is scary stuff. I mean, to think that we're getting fed all these processed foods and this is happening inside our bodies. Yeah. So a question I have for the audience, and thank you so much, Karen. And I know that you're a busy person, and so if you need to leave, you've done your job, but we'd love to have you stay as long as you can. But this is where I'd love to ask our audience a question that you can respond in the chat, or you can unmute yourself or ask me to unmute you. But I related the science. Karen has brought up all this really specific stuff that's kind of scary. And what I wonder, though, is I've watched so much scientific evidence come down over the years. I've been in this, like I said, 30 some years. We've gotten tons and tons of different scientific evidence, and yet our health data keeps going down, down, down. So I'm curious, I just like a little feedback. Does the science convince you, or is there something else that would convince you and motivate you to really tackle and take this processed food business pretty seriously? And so I know in my own case, I thought about this for myself, is that when I first got into this, I didn't know any science. There wasn't that much science then, there was some. But what motivated me is I was really sick. My kids were sick. I just got busy and changed things. And automatically, because we went to a real whole food diet free of dairy and gluten, we got rid of ultra processed foods, and we've never gotten back on them. And what keeps me motivated is just the joy and the wonder of having good health, like all the time. So that's why I wonder, well, maybe other people, maybe the science doesn't really motivate them. So anyway, I would love to hear, does anybody want to throw in the chat, or, when you want to raise your hand, you can go down to reactions and there's a raise hand thing. But I would love to hear it. And don't worry if you haven't ever thought about that, but it would be fun to hear some of your reactions and some of your feelings on that and feedback. Anybody want to volunteer? Cindy, I know we talked about it. Yeah, go ahead. And let's see, do I need to unmute you? I'll ask you to unmute. I asked you to unmute. Oh, good.
Well, I mean, I need this refresher, and I'm an example of, I'm single, so I cook for myself, and I love to cook. But in the last month, I broke a bone in my leg, so I couldn't keep up with my normal physical activity. I couldn't cook like I like to cook. So I was eating processed foods. And honestly, I gained 10 pounds in 6 weeks.
There's the evidence.
from inactivity and watching TV and munching, you know. This is a wake-up call for me, I'm going to tell you, because I mean, I really believe the science, and I know that. And the thing about processed foods and snacks is I do believe they put something on them that makes you crave more.
Absolutely.
You know?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's well documented. I mean, there's so many books out on that. You know, if ever you want, I should maybe include some of those books in the show notes. Because maybe that also helps us. Mm-hmm. If we see what's being done to us, maybe we would have a better sense of, wow, I don't know that I want to have this going on anymore in my life. So,
right.
Well, thank you, Cindy. And is there anybody else, Heather or Suzanne, anybody else want to give us an idea? Or Lori, you wrote an email, and you were kind of pretty bummed about the role of processed foods in your life. Would you like to talk to us a little bit about what might motivate you? I think I asked you to unmute. There we go. I'm putting you on the spot, Lori. But Lori, you've been with me a long time.
Well, I normally do pretty well with eating, whole foods. But again, I work 6 days a week, and I'm in a hurry a lot and have to grab something. So, and I had heard that there were different levels of processed food. So that's what I was asking about too. But yeah, when the biggest thing is when I get in a hurry and don't have time to, like she said, cook or prepare something, then that's kind of a go-to, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, we're going to talk about this, okay? And so maybe we can go on. And thank you so much for your feedback. And if anybody else has anything, feel free to throw it in the chat. Love to hear from you. And you are exactly expressing what the problem is here, because you both touched on the solution. We're not going to starve if we get rid of processed foods, or ultra processed foods, I should say. Because there is this entire wonderful food kingdom of and Lori, if I could ask you, I can mute you from here. There's just this wonderful food world that's called the real whole foods. And there's, hundreds of them. They're all delicious. They can all fill us up and satisfy us completely. But the problem, of course, you guys have touched on it already. If you had to choose, all things being equal, who wouldn't choose a real whole food diet? But the problem is that the real whole foods, the equation doesn't look equal in our minds, because your real whole foods have to be cooked. And that's just kind of the bottom line. They didn't have to be cooked. Like if you were Oprah and you could have your own personal chef, who wouldn't do that, of course, right? So, we look at this, and it's, you both of you have, Cindy and Lori have both expressed that, who can possibly make meals 3 days a week, 3 times a day, 7 days a week? I mean, whoever can do that? How would you know what to make? What would you buy at the store? On and on and on. Bottom line, it just doesn't seem within the realm of possibility in our busy lives today. In fact, it seems a little bit outlandish. It doesn't seem viable is the problem. And that's what I wanted to talk to you about, is this thing I call the viability issue. Sure, on the one hand, we understand there's these scary health problems that can arise from a diet around ultra processed foods. But then on the other hand, it's like, is a real whole food diet really viable in our busy world today, our busy lives? So this is how we get trapped into this processed food force field, because on the one hand, we hear the science, we know the problem with our health, but on the other, we're looking at this huge thing called cooking meals 3 times a day, 7 days a week. And it just seems like it's easy to, the health issues kind of seem like we can sweep them under the rug. They seem distant. So we can put those aside. But on the other hand, when you've got your ultra processed foods and they're so convenient, it avoids a cooking problem right now. It seems a lot more immediate where we want to go on that. So I want to talk about today 2 solutions that I want to share with you today. And there's lots of different solutions, but I want to talk about just 2 today. And the first of those is to simplify cooking so it's not such a big darn deal for us. And then also, the second one is to observe our thinking. Like I mentioned earlier, there's something called enablement that's going on here. And if we need to become more aware of how we might be being enabled in this kind of eating, I think it would help us a lot to be able to better control what our hand reaches for. So let's go ahead and get started on that first strategy, which is to simplify our cooking. And today we're going to learn 2 strategies around simplifying our cooking. The first is just sticking to simple triangle meals. Triangle meal is pretty simple: a starch, a protein, a vegetable. And you can work with the proportions based on your dietary needs. But you might remember when all of us were raised, this is a lot of times what we were raised on. I know that's what my family meals looked like when I was growing up. And they can seem kind of boring, but honestly, I get really good, healthy meals, and they're actually quite delicious. And they make up probably 50% of my meals are just simple triangle meals because I do keep it simple. The other thing I want to share with us today is just a few simple cooking techniques, because if you can get those down, then you don't have to struggle with recipes. You can take the same technique, use them for all sorts of different vegetables, for all sorts of different proteins, and you can get those simple triangle meals with a lot of variety. So that's what we're going to go ahead and do today. And what we're going to be making is sauteed chicken breast. So we'll learn about sauteing, roasted cabbage. So we'll learn a little bit about roasting, making brown basmati rice. So learning a little about cooking whole grains, and then talking a little bit about some fun that we can add to the dish that makes in really fun and easy ways. And just so you know, caveat, this is not a gourmet cooking class. I know that because we don't need gourmet meals all the time. We need simple stuff that's still healthy but tasty for us. So let me go ahead and I'm going to switch my camera now and get on over to the kitchen. Let's see. And while I'm doing this, does anybody have any questions? Let's see if I can get this on here, right? Does that look, nope, a little more down. Yeah, there we go. Does anybody have any questions that you can, I think you can, let's see, I think you'd have to, I thought you could unmute yourself. You're supposed to be able to unmute yourself if you needed to.
Yeah, we can unmute ourselves.
Oh, good. Okay, so yeah, so if you have any questions while I'm getting started here, feel free to ask.
I have a question.
Yes,
Can you hear
ahead.
me? Okay. As far as cooking in oil,
Yes.
I'm using olive oil, but then I heard it's not good for high temperature cooking. So I was wondering what oil you recommended for high.
I'm just getting the oven set up, so I will pop back up here in just a second. A lot of times what people will suggest is, I'm thinking avocado oil. I think that's one of the higher heat ones. There's safflower and sunflower, but a lot of people don't like those because they're the seed oils. And then grapeseed oil, I think that's viewed as a pretty healthy one, and it goes pretty high. And I was thinking of one other, but it's escaping me. Well, some people use coconut oil because that can go pretty high. Yeah, do you use any of those ones?
Well, actually, I have a combination avocado olive oil, but I don't have a straight avocado.
Yes, and I use sunflower oil, and I know that a lot of people don't like that because it's high, and I think it's omega-6s. Too bad Karen's not here; she could tell us for sure. But I use it so rarely that I don't worry about it too much. I use olive oil as my main one, and then if I do something where I like stir fry, where I have to heat it up higher, I use the safflower oil for that. And I know that they go up higher. I don't remember on the coconut oil, but you know what I can do is I can look that up afterwards and give that to you. Who is this, by the way?
This is Lori.
Lori. Okay, yeah, we can look that up.
I don't think coconut oil is good for high heating either.
You know, okay, I've heard different things on that, but what I can do is I can look it up and find out for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, wonderful. Okay, so let's start first with the thing that takes the longest in this meal, and that's the brown rice. So simple in terms of ingredients. It's rice, water, and salt, right? Okay, and your rice proportion is always 1 cup of the grain to the 2 cups of water. And then don't worry if you can't keep up with all of these little tips and pointers because they're all in your handout, so no worries about that. And I did put the link to the handouts in the chat, so if you want to get a hold of it right away, you can do that too. But for now, don't worry about it. So I put in about a 1/4 teaspoon of salt with that, and now you can go ahead and give it a stir. But that would be the last time that you want to stir it, because if you keep stirring the rice while it's cooking, too much water will evaporate and your rice will get mushy again. So I've got this brown rice in there. A lot of people complain about, well, brown rice takes so long to cook. But you can see that the actual hands-on prep time is no different for brown rice versus white. It just takes longer to cook. And so to solve that, like for instance, this afternoon, I made a demonstration batch of rice. I just put it on while I was futzing around the kitchen on low. And by the time that I was done and ready for class, the rice was done. And now this I can store in the refrigerator and have it for the next few days, just heat it up in the microwave. I can also freeze it. And then I've got it in the next couple of weeks if I need some and I don't have time to cook it from scratch. There's also some great prepackaged rice that's already cooked and all you have to do is microwave it. And there's also instant brown rice, maybe not quite as nutritious as the brown rice that you cook yourself, but still pretty darn good. So what we need to do then is once we get this together, we've given it a stir. Big thing about cooking rice is you want to have a good, pretty sizable saucepan because remember it expands. This is probably a 3 or 4 quart, and depending upon how much rice you cook. And you want to make sure that it's got a pretty heavy bottom. It'll be pretty solid in your hand. You don't want to remember these old little Revere wares that was pretty thin. Your rice will probably be burned in those. So get a heavy bottomed one, and you want the lid to be really tight fitting. You don't want your old Goodwill lid that is kind of halfway fit because too much of the water will evaporate before the rice cooks. So once this is done, then we go ahead and we put it on the burner and turn the burner up to high, and then we let it come to a boil. Then turn it down so it just barely simmers. I'm sure a lot of you know all of this. It's not a big deal. The other thing we can do, and I'm going to do it today, is I'm turning that burner clear down to simmer. I'm just going to let it sit there for the next, hour or so, even after class, and it will cook over time. And then I don't have to worry about overboiling it and losing a lot of the water to steam, because there's a magic that happens if you cook it without too much of the water escaping because you're checking it all the time, or because you're trying to stir it, or because you overboil it. Then if you don't do that and you just let it cook on a simmer, by the time the water's gone, the rice is cooked magically. It's a little bit of cooking magic. So when you think it's done, you'll hear it. You won't hear the water in there kind of simmering anymore. Then what you want to do is take your fork, and I'll see if I can get up close here. Take your fork and kind of just pull it apart and make sure there's not even a skim of water down there. Want all the water evaporated, and then you'll know that your rice is done. And it's actually kind of good to. Rice can be done just a little bit in advance of when you want to eat it, because being able to let it sit for a little bit, I think, seems to make the rice better. And I have read that before too, and I think that is true. And then if it gets too cool, then you can go ahead and just warm it up in the microwave if you need to. So good. So that's our step one, learning how to cook the rice. A big thing is getting a decent pan for it, and then just remember, don't stir it. Keep the lid on, and then wait until it's all done before you check it. Okay, so now let's go on to the cabbage. And this is we're going to learn a little bit about roasting. And, it's interesting that for the longest time, when I first started in film, nobody roasted vegetables. In fact, when I was a kid, nobody roasted vegetables. I think that's so tragic because it's such a great way to cook vegetables. But now we know a lot about roasting vegetables and how wonderful it is. And people do it a lot. Let's see, I'm going to move this back over here. And so what we're going to do is roast the cabbage, because a lot of people know about roasting, but a lot of people have not roasted cabbage before. So when we did this as a live class, people were really thrilled with it. And so I hope you'll give it a try as well and see. So what I do is you can roast, we're going to do red and green cabbage. What I do is I cut it into these nice little wedges. And you can see that what I do is, let me see, I think you can see this, is that I've got a little bit of the core here to hold it together. Now, you don't have to worry if you can't get it cut like this. That's not a problem. It will work out. I've done it a lot of times where I just had just big hunks of the cabbage cut however I could cut them, and that worked just fine too. Having a little bit of core in there just makes it stick together just a little bit better. So what I do when I'm trying to do this is I kind of cut the cabbage into I have it so that I've got the core there, and then I actually kind of quartered it. So now I can kind of get in there and cut through a little bit of the core and then get this nice little wedges that are stick together as much as I can. Pretty soon you're going to run out of core and you can't do anymore. And the thing about roasting is that you've got all this list of techniques in your handouts, but what we're trying to do with roasting, and anytime you're working with vegetables and cooking them, is get the pieces cut in as equally sized pieces as you can so that they cook evenly. And then with roasting, it's pretty simple. We're going to do just this much right now. It's pretty simple. You cut the vegetables, you put some oil on them, and you salt and pepper them. Then you cook them or roast them on a fairly high heat, which is usually around 400, 425. I use 425 because my oven runs a little cool. And so now I'm putting this olive oil on them. I've already oiled my pan, so the other side of them has a little bit of oil on it too. Then I take and put some salt and pepper on them, season them, and then I'll just pop them in the oven. And every vegetable, of course, takes a little bit different in terms of time that they take to cook. And so these roasted cabbage, I'm going to guess a good 15 minutes for them. But we'll just check them. And of course, everybody's different. You might like your cabbage a little crunchier, maybe a little softer. So you have to kind of gauge that on your own. Oops, there we go. Okay. And then we got our green cabbage in, and let's go ahead and we'll do the red cabbage now. I had never done red cabbage, but when we did the class, we did a class at Natural Grocers, and it was a live class. We did some red cabbage, and so this red cabbage seems to be a little sturdier than green. So I go ahead and I cut that into smaller pieces. I'm cutting them into squares about an inch square. And you can see that what I did is I cut them one way and cut them the other way. I cut like a third of the head of cabbage off. Then I'm going to go ahead and put it in here. And then this is how generally you do the roasted vegetables. We put them in a dish, Then we pour the olive oil over, and again, season them, and stick them in the oven. And now, every one of the vegetables that you roast, because you can roast so many different kinds. There are some little tweaks and adaptations you take depending upon the kind of vegetable you're talking about. Some are harder and they take a little bit more moisture. You want to crowd them in. Some are less moist and you want to spread them apart. I put notes on that in your handout, so don't worry, you can find that there. But you can see, the basic thing you're doing when you're putting the olive oil on with your hands is you're trying to get every piece coated. That's the big idea there. And then we'll season those and pop those in, and there we go. And these, like I said, these might take a little bit longer than the green cabbage. We'll see. And let's see, we'll put some salt and pepper on. And so I hope you all will give a try to roasted cabbage. This is a pretty good time of year for cabbage. It's winter, when right around St. Patrick's Day is always a great time for cabbage. But I think there's still some really good cabbage out there now. As summer comes on, it might get a little warm for cabbage to be really nice and sweet like we like. So now you can see this is not rocket science, is it? We got some whole grain rice going. A real whole food. We got cabbage, again, real whole food. And now we'll do our chicken breast. And I think that I forgot to get my chicken breast out of the kitchen, out of the refrigerator. So best laid plans of being all prepared. Let me grab them out. Here we go. And now, we all love chicken breasts because they're easy to cook. And back in the low-fat 90s days, we liked them also because they were low in fat. They were not as concerned about that anymore, but they're still really convenient. But the problem is because they don't have much fat, they can be a little bit tricky to cook because they can easily turn into dry and tough chicken rather than moist and tender. So I want to talk to you just a little bit about what we can do to make it a little easier to cook them so that they are moist and tender rather than dry and tough. And the first thing I'm doing is going to go ahead and preheat my pan. It's on medium heat. A lot of times we saute on higher heats, and again, all of this is in your notes, so don't worry if you don't catch it all. We do higher heats for things that are tougher, like say zucchini, or like you say you're doing a stir fry with different vegetables, so we use real high heat. But chicken is a little more tender, doesn't have that fat, so it doesn't have that much tolerance for high heat. So we want to use just a medium heat. We also want a pan that's pretty heavy bottomed. This is not as heavy as my really big saute pan there. And we want it big enough so our pieces can fit in without being squashed. And we'll get to that in just a minute. And now I used to always cook my chicken breasts, like most of them. They come in these nice halves. But what I found is that by the time the inside would cook, the edges would be overcooked. So that's why I'm doing what you're seeing here is I'm cutting that chicken breast into little medallions about like this. They're about a 1/2 inch thick. Let me see if I can get that just a little bit closer so you can see it. About a 1/2 inch thick. And I'm just making them. And then what you're going to find is that they cook a lot quicker, number one, and also they cook more evenly so that you don't end up with parts of them that are overdone and other parts that aren't. So now we're going to go ahead and I'll just use up the rest of this oil. And I am just using olive oil. That is the main oil that I use for most things. But if I'm going to do something that is high heat, like Lori was mentioning, or if I'm doing something that, say, is an Asian dish where I don't really want the flavor of olive oil in it, then I'll use my neutrally flavored oil and this high heat oil, the sunflower oil. So now what we're doing with sauteing, the other technique we need to know is that one, we want to cut the pieces pretty equally, just like with the roasting of the vegetables. Two, we want to have a heavy bottom pan and pretty big enough to fit all the food without crowding it in there. And then three, we want to get the oil in there and get it pretty warm. If you're going to do, say, zucchini, you'd want it really hot but not smoky. This, we want to have it just warm so that when we put the chicken in, it will be, we'll hear a gentle sizzle. So let's see if we can hear it. Oh, and I think you'll be able to pick that up on the microphone. I might move my microphone over. I hope you all are hearing me okay. There we go. And then we'll go ahead and put these in. And now, remember I said you want a pan big enough that you can put all of your chicken pieces in. I'll show it to you when I've got them all in there. You want to have all your pieces in there so they're not crowded. And the reason is that the whole point of sauteing is that you want to brown the food. That gives them a lot of good flavor. But if everything's crowded in there, it steams rather than browns. And steamed chicken is okay, but I think you probably enjoy the brown chicken a lot better. So that's why I want to go ahead and you can see, I think you can see in there how I've got a little space around each one of those pieces. And then we'll go ahead again and season. And then what we do is we let those brown for sure on one side. And sometimes I always would flip them too soon, and then we want to have enough time on one side so that when we flip them, we only have to cook to the other half, not 2/3 of the chicken breast. I don't know if that makes sense. So then once these are cooked though, we're going to have a perfectly good meal. We're going to have the brown rice, we're going to have the roasted cabbage, and we're going to have the sauteed chicken breast. And we're going to learn how to do that in a way so that those chicken breasts taste really nice and moist and tender, and they don't taste dry and tough. So they will be just fine. We can eat them on their own. But if we want to, we could have a little fun with this really easily. One thing we can do is once these chicken breasts are out of here, we can take and throw in just a little bit of mustard and a little bit of chicken broth, deglaze the pan, which simply means that you're getting up all the little bits from browning the chicken, and make a quick sauce. And I even have some these beautiful fresh chives. Well, I need to use that. So if you've got any fresh herbs, you can throw that in there as well. So that's one easy option. But the other thing is, we talked about how we're all pretty darn busy. So, there are some kind of minimally processed or culinarily processed foods that are sauces that are really wonderful. A lot of sauces you got to watch out for. There's a lot of junk in them. But when we did this class at the Natural Grocers, we used 2 sauces. One of them was blue mousse pesto. All it had in it was basil, pine nuts, olive oil, and salt. And maybe Parmesan cheese. So there you go. You could have made that yourself, but there's somebody else who did it for you. And so, yay, you can go ahead and take advantage of that kind of processed convenience. Let me go ahead, and I think we're ready. I can see that these chicken breast pieces are being cooked up about halfway up the height, you might say, of the chicken breast. And so I'm going to go ahead and turn them, and I've got some beautiful browning on it that looks so delicious. But now at this point, once I get them flipped over, I'm going to actually turn my heat down. I'm going to see, I don't know if the camera will pick this up or not. I'll see if I can tip it down, and I don't know that I can catch it. But maybe you can see some of that really nice browning there. But now, what I'm going to do to finish it is to go ahead and turn that down. I might even, if the lid is out, I'd go ahead and put the lid on. Because at this point, we don't want the chicken to cook too much faster. We want to slow it down, let it finish cooking until it's done through, but not overdone. So that's a tricky thing. And a lot of times what I do to figure that out is I just cut them open. I don't fool around with worrying about whether I've cooked them completely or not. I just cut each piece open and kind of peek in it, and then I find out if it's really done or not. Okay, so now back to those sauces though. The other sauce that we used in the live class was one called bitchin'. And I know that sounds very crude. That is actually the name of it. But it's a wonderful sauce, and it's made with almonds. It's kind of like a creamy sauce that they use almonds, lemon, and a couple of other things that I've got them written down. But they're all just real whole foods that you could have bought at the store yourself and made the sauce. But they did the work for you, and so those are the kind of processed foods that are okay. And They make life easier for us so that we can make great, tasty meals, no problem. And they add a lot of fun. And then, that's who doesn't like a little fun in their meals? And so then we can take this really simple meal and all of a sudden make it a lot more interesting and fun with just the addition of a little sauce. And for me, I can't have the dairy in the regular pesto sauce. So I've got my own pesto sauce underneath. So that's what I'm going to put on for something fun. And you may have something like that, or you may have something else in your refrigerator that you could use to doll up your chicken breast. So let's go ahead, and I can see that these are getting very close. And one of the things that you can do is when you slice into the chicken, if it comes apart easily, then you know that you're done. And I can look down here, I can still see that there's a lot of moisture in the chicken breast, but it is no longer pink. And that's exactly where you want to catch it. It's right at that thing, right at that point. And this one is just, it's got another 30 seconds, but you have to realize to get this chicken to come out just right, it's maybe 10, 20, 30 seconds is all between being underdone and then starting to get overdone and done tough. So we need to go on and finish up the last of our seminar. So I'm going to go ahead and just turn this off, and I'll finish cooking them to the extent I need to, because they're actually pretty close to being done, but I'll put this back. And then our rice is, it's not quite simmering, but it will eventually come up to a simmer, and then we'll just let that cook until I'm ready for bed, and it'll be ready in the morning when I want some more rice. And let's take a look at our cabbage and see. It's probably been about 10 minutes. And I can see that my cabbage, pardon my glasses that all fogged up, I'm getting some nice browning on the cabbage. And so I can tell that I'm going to guess it's been about 10 minutes. I'm going to guess that it's going to need to be like another 10 minutes. But what I hope you can see is that, and one of the questions that I always ask people at the end of a cooking demonstration is, was there anything about that setup? Whoops, let's see, turn this around again. Or actually, I think I'll just take and move this back onto my computer so that it's easier to. Let's see, where is that little one? There it is. Okay, we'll just move this back onto here now. There we go. Okay, so good. So yeah, so what I always ask people after I'm done with the cooking demo, is there anything that you could not have done about that meal? Put together a little brown rice, cut some cabbage, put some olive oil on it, cut and cook your chicken. I don't know. Does anybody think that that's something that would be beyond them? I don't think so. I'm sure that all of you could have done just fine with that entire meal. And what you can see is that especially when we add just a little fun sauce on the chicken, we've got a perfectly delightful meal. We don't have to do anything more gourmet or fancier than that. So that brings me back to this issue of enablement. I mean, I've talked about that just a couple of times, because even as easy as that is, and you know it makes sense, right? And you know the health dangers and you want to do it, but is there still something nagging at you? Like you both, Cindy and Lori, both, you know, you're doing a good job. But there's still this think about, well, how could I really do that? How could anybody do this? How do we have time to do this? And this gets me into this radical thought about enablement, because here's my question. Has the convenience food industry enabled us to eat in a way that doesn't serve our health and our best interests? So let's talk a little bit about that word enablement. I think we all know about it. It's a real popular psychology term right now. Well, here's the definition of an enabler. An enabler is one that enables another to achieve an end, especially a self-destructive behavior. like eating processed foods that are damaging to our health, right? So enablers do this by providing excuses or by making it possible to avoid the consequences of such behavior. So have you ever thought about the manufacturers of processed foods, ultra-processed foods, as being enablers? Now, let me give you just a story that made me think about this. Is I get a farm share every summer, but a year ago, last summer, I needed to go on vacation, and so I was going on vacation right when I was going to get my farm share and wouldn't be able to use it. So I was going around asking a couple neighbors if they'd like to pick up my share and use it, and I was talking to Dave and Sally, and at first Dave was like, "Oh yeah, we really want to start eating more local farm produce," and then he said, "But wait, well, we're going to a concert tomorrow night." And then another one on the next night, and then another one on the next night. So I guess we better not take that farm share because it'll probably go to waste, and we don't want to do that. And so he said, yeah, just find somebody else. And so I went on, found somebody else. But as I was walking away, I got to thinking, I said, well, wait a minute. If they're not going to cook tomorrow night, and not the next night, and the next night, what are they going to do for food? And I realized, well, they can do that. They can go to concerts 3 nights in a row, not worry about their food needs because of the existence of ultra-processed foods. And the same was true for this young woman, Allie, who works remotely. Her job is a couple hours away, but she only has to go in once a week. So she would always race out after work one night, late afternoon, get down, stay in a hotel, and then be able to go to work in the morning and then come home. But she'd always get down to the hotel, 7:30, 8 o'clock, hadn't thought about her meals. She was starving. What happens when we find ourselves in those situations? That's when we have to turn to ultra-processed foods because that's what's available. There's a vending machine in the hotel, or there's fast food restaurants that seem to sprout up around hotels. You're kind of forced into that situation because we're used to living our lives with all of our different activities and not having to worry about our food needs. And what's interesting is when you compare this to times previous, centuries and millennia, what would happen if people in days past didn't think about their food needs? They would have consequences, right? They would be really hungry. They might starve. I think about the pioneers crossing the plains, and they didn't think about their food needs. There wasn't a McDonald's along the way. They needed to figure that out on their own and always have that. So a question for you is, what happened such that we can ignore and forget about and neglect our food needs? We don't have to worry about meals. And why? And further, how do we get to a point in our food history where we can think that it's outrageous and crazy and impossible to be able to make our own meals? Like, what happened? And I think that it was the dawn of ultra-processed foods, right? First, they put them everywhere. I mean, it doesn't matter whether you're at the gas station or you're at a concert, you're at the movies, wherever, there's always tons of UPFs that we can take advantage of if we get hungry. We never have to go anywhere, but there's not some ultra-processed foods there for us to take advantage of. And then because of that, we've reorganized our lives and filled it with other activities. They're fun. We love doing them. But because we have our life filled with those, it's pretty difficult to find time to make our own meals. And we've got work, we've got broken legs, we've got all sorts of things going on. So it's really hard to be able to figure out how do we organize our lives around getting those meals on the table that would serve our health instead of damaging our health. And then, of course, we have some incredible psychology going on in the marketing. I mean, people are, the ads are just phenomenal what they're doing. One of the things that I think is so this is really lamentable, is that they have the ads denigrate cooking. So cooking in the kitchen, painting them as old-fashioned and silly and trite, and nobody wants to spend their time there. And so when you look at all of this, it gets really hard to look at our health consequences and be able to pursue our health dreams and our health goals when we have all these forces working against us. So question is, does this look like enablement to you? Remember, an enabler is one that enables another to achieve an end, especially a self-destructive behavior. And they do this by making it possible to avoid the consequences of such behavior. In other words, in any other time in the history of the world, in a lot of parts of the world, even now, if you didn't take care of your food needs, you would starve. You'd be really hungry. So you might be going, well, wow, how did this all happen? Like, why did this change? Well, you know, money's at the root of a lot of things, right? And there's a lot of money riding on this. And that's why you also have to realize that if you want to move your life away from processed foods, you're bucking a lot of influence in our society. Money, there's just a lot of money. There's a lot of money riding on keeping us trapped in the processed food force field. So just to draw this to a close, in terms of solutions we've talked about, you know, the viability issue, well, we can get past a lot of that if we simplify cooking. And you saw, that was a meal that took 10 minutes of hands-on time, right? Maybe more than that, because I had a little pre-prep done, so maybe 15 minutes, okay? So that's one solution, but the other solution is, let's think about our thinking a little bit. We want to stop our hand. Don't reach for those crackers. Don't reach for that energy bar. But is that realistic to think when our brains are so mired in this psychology of convenience, and really hyperpalatable taste that we can't stop? Do we need to look at what's happening with our brains first? And so a couple of things to think about is, one, start paying attention. You know, we let all this wash over us. We don't pay attention. Start paying attention, having an awareness of how we've been enabled and how we've been forced to rely on UPFs. We're trapped in that force field. Then realize that we have agency. Nobody's holding a gun to our head saying, you must eat these. We can stop what goes in our mouth. We can also stop what's going in our brains. So the other thing we can do is begin thinking about the organization of our lives. And this is a tough one. I know we all have busy lives. But do we need to think about and let our minds consider that we could reorganize our lives bit by bit so that we open the space to be able to make these meals that serve our health instead of destroying our health? Be real aware of the groupthink that is trapping us. You know, there's a lot of groupthink out there that, oh, making your meals, that's dreary, that's limiting. And the food industry has contributed to that. It's boring, it's old-fashioned, nobody does that. It's much more convenient and modern if you just eat processed foods. What gets left out of that conversation is the joyful side of making our own food, seeing the joy. It doesn't have to be fancy, but just seeing the joy of taking care of ourselves, taking control of our own health. And you know, cooking can be a really pleasant, tactile, engaging activity, especially gets us away from screens, gets us up and moving. So there's a lot of really good stuff that we never pay attention to. And I want to encourage us to think about that. And then finally, be courageous. I know there's groupthink that thinks we're crazy. I mean, people who, you know, I was talking with the woman who's the nutrition counselor at that Natural Grocer, said, all our friends think we're crazy because, wait, you're not going to stay for happy hour? No, I think I've had enough happiness. I'm going to go home and make my meal. And everybody thinks we're crazy. And so it takes courage to be able to buck the trend, buck all the dollars that are betting on you eating ultra processed food. And so we have to dig deep in this. And one of the things that I find that really helps me is the power of mad. Now, we want to be careful. We don't want to get mad over silly things. It can be a dangerous sword. But if a friend was enabling you to do something that was destructive and you found out about it, would you not be just a little mad? Would you not do something? Well, the convenience food industry is not even your friend, and yet they're doing this to us. So get mad about it and go, no, I am not going to be hoodwinked into and being enabled to work against my own best self-interest. So, and then finally, just calm down. This is a journey. I don't expect anybody, nobody can. It took me years to get off completely of processed foods. And so it will take you as well. And it takes time. But just keep putting one foot in front of the others. So I hope what you've gotten today is a good sense of what ultra-processed foods are, which one of the processed foods are the problems. It's the ultra-processed foods. How do you find out which ones are? Read the ingredient listing. And then what's the science say? These are clear dangers. And also think about what might motivate you if it's not the science. And then to see that we've got two solutions. Simplify cooking. Make it entirely doable. It is entirely doable. Doesn't have to be gourmet. Doesn't have to be fancy. And then start really thinking about what goes on in your head. Because I have a theory, and I love your feedback on this, that if we can readjust our thinking, this is what the new eating culture is all about. If we can adjust our thinking to where we look at ultra-processed foods and we go, that's not a food. That's not a food. If we can get to that point, then it's a lot easier to stop our hand from reaching for those things, because we look at them and we see that's an industrial formulation. That's not anything that's going to contribute to me. But we have to change our thinking and our viewpoint about how we look at the food on the grocery store shelves. So I want to thank you all. I've gone over just a few minutes. I want to thank you all for joining me today. And I would love to hear any questions you have, any comments, any feedback. I mean, what do you think about this idea? Oh, by the way, we're going to do another seminar, a webinar in a month, where we're going to get into more practical tips and the motivation issue. We just touched on that today with the science, but we're going to do another one. I'm going to be doing it with another health coach, Sarah Eisenberg. And so I hope you'll join me for that so we can continue this conversation. But I would love your feedback. Does it make sense that if we pay attention to our brains, maybe that would help our hands and what we reach for? And I know that's not some specific tips. We're going to give more specific tips next time, but I think it has to start in our brains. So anyway, any feedback on that?
Yeah, I would say that you definitely, like you were saying, that the mindset is powerful, and how they've made it so easy for us to just grab a bag of this or a bag of that, say so. And thank you for showing how simple the triangle meal is to make. Bless you.
Yeah. I drank water too fast. No, you're absolutely right. Yeah. And I'm glad that came across for you. Does that sound like a strategy that could work for you? Because I know you've talked about this before, the business of, how do I get these meals on the table?
Yeah, it's the whole thing of, the idea of, well, sometimes you get overwhelmed by it and thinking that, well, I got to do this and this, but also it's just, trying to keep it simple and say, oh, this is what, plan it, this is what I'm going to do this week. And these are the triangle meal you could do this week, these several ones for dinner, and then fill whatever else in with lunch and breakfast and just get it down. That's my problems. I eat a river of the same food.
Right. And thank you for bringing that up, because I don't know that I emphasized it enough, that when you learn those basic techniques like roasting, Okay, you can do those without thinking about them. You don't need a recipe, but you can do those for carrots. You can do those for beets. You can do those for asparagus. You can do those for any number of foods. Once you get the technique down, practice it a couple times, and then then it doesn't have to be a big production. It's like, okay, you get 4 vegetables to plan for the week. You roast one, you roast another, roast another, roast another. It's easy. Or you saute one. And then you might cook brown rice, you might cook quinoa, you might cook millet. Do you see all the variety that you got there? And it's pretty easy. And of course, make everything leftovers, because then you've got your lunch.
Right.
Done. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, good. Well, I will be interested to hear how it goes for you.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And then you were talking about the I guess the notes or something for the presentation today, or
yes, and they are I'll be it's in the chat right now if you can grab it right at the top of the chat. And I saw people put stuff in the there were some chats here that I didn't catch, and I'm very sorry for that, but what I do is I will be sending out the replay. I will answer these things in the chat, and I'll put the link for the handouts as well. And I'll put the Blue Moose and Bitchin products in there in case you want to give those a try. Those are the 2 sauces that I mentioned. Yeah. Is there anything else that I need to include? Anybody?
I can't understand what sauce you're talking about. Are you saying Bitchin?
You know the word bitch, B-I-T-C-H?
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
I've never heard of
that. My daughter-in-law turned me on to this one a long time ago, and I was going, what are you saying? And that is exactly what I'm saying. But it's all real whole ingredients, and you know, you have to pay a little bit for these kinds of things because they're doing the work for you. But both of them, you don't need a lot, and you can make several meals with one thing. So
where did you say you get that bitchin' sauce?
I know you can get them at natural grocers.
Oh, natural grocers.
And the Blue Moose is also at natural grocers.
Okay. I got the Blue Moose. I just couldn't get the other one. I'm like, what?
No, it's as crude as it sounds.
Oh my God. Okay.
Oh goodness. Well, and if you guys are still here, I'm going to pull that cabbage out. I'm hoping it didn't burn. But I can show it to you. It burned just a little bit. But let me see if I can kind of, let's see. Can you see that? Does that show up? There.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so it did burn a little bit because I was sitting here blabbing. But you can see it gets some nice browning. And then you just take your fork and stick it in there and see if it's tender enough for you. And yeah, I kind of like it just a little bit crunchy. If it's not, you can put just a little water in here, stick it back in, and you can also, at this point, turn the oven down so it doesn't brown anymore. And I might try that just to see how that works. Because it maybe I didn't need the oven on quite so high. And then let's see. Okay, and I love the I'll show you the purple cabbage too. Can you see that? And that looks like it's pretty well done. It's gotten brown, it's tender, but I might have to put just a little bit of hot water in with that one too. You want to use hot water so it doesn't break your dish. Yeah, but it is pretty well cooked. So anyway, I think it'll be fun to have both of those, and you can see I've got lots of vegetables for leftovers. Yeah. So, well, good. Well, I just want to thank you all again, and I really appreciate your coming. If there's no other questions, we'll go ahead and close it out. But thank you so much, and do look for the one next month.